Welcome back to the Stellaris Museum Campaign Abridged, where last time I went around turning everybody into my protectorate, so that when I want to I can absorb them, disappearing their faction and putting all of their population in my lovely Birch world. So we essentially just did that to a whole bunch of factions, winning loads of wars. And then what I did is actually delete accidentally the footage between 2350 and 2400. So we're skipping ahead now, and I'll tell you what happened in the part that we missed. Nothing. You might notice everything's pretty much exactly the same. And that's for a very special reason actually. It turns out that when you make a faction your protectorate, they're not allowed to expand anymore. So I actually left the game running on max speed and just watched something on another monitor, thinking I'd come back around 2400 to absorb the entire galaxy, but the other factions didn't spread out very much as it happens, because they're not allowed to claim new systems while they're a protectorate to another faction. So I actually went and looked up what was going on with that, and it turns out there's some sneaky hidden thing where in order for your protectorates to still act like normal factions, you have to be a feudal society. And to be a feudal society, you also have to be a monarchy. So that means we need to come in here and do some governmental reforms. Luckily we've built up so much influence from not expanding our own territory that we can just change our government at will pretty much. So we'll just throw some stuff out and suddenly become the feudal king of the galaxy. This will reactivate our protectorate factions and allow them to spread out over the galaxy, which they will do quite fast now because they've been sitting there building up their influence the whole time as well, so they can quickly claim a bunch of systems. A bit late in the game now though, we're entering the end game and I wanted to be now already starting to absorb the full galaxy because it will take some time. But now we're going to wait again effectively to see if we can get some more population centers growing before we try that. You might have noted by the way there was another faction called the Awoken. That's a faction that's actually not my protectorate that is spreading out over the galaxy. It's a faction that's created through a story event. Just some robots. We'll have to protectorate them later of course to keep our plan going. Here is me somewhat pointlessly going after the engineered evolution Ascension perk. I was taking that because I had this very vague memory that someone in the comments of my previous series had mentioned that if you have some kind of special genetic engineering Ascension perk, you can change a hive mind to not be a hive mind anymore, which will prevent them from dying if you attempt to integrate them, which we'll want to do because there is a big hive mind in the galaxy with like 1,000 pops, which right now we can't really access because they'll just disappear if we try to integrate them. By the way, that's not how you do it. There is actually a way of genetically engineering hive minds to make them survive, which I looked up after trying this method and it failed later, which is of course not the best way to do it, but I suppose it's the less cheaty way to do it or something. We're learning through experience here. And as a quick note on what I was actually doing while sitting around mostly doing nothing, aside from the nothing, I did make the odd megastructure. I made the Matryoshka Brain, the Dyson Sphere, a Star Lifter, and a Hyperforge, things that will provide me with tons of research, tons of money and tons of alloys, all the stuff we need for late game military antics, which will eventually come about because that 10 times multiplied crisis is on the way. We might have protectorated everyone, but the ancient empires don't fall under that rule because they can't be protectorated. So what I have to do about these guys is do things the hard way. I need to claim all of their territory so I can just conquer them, and because we don't really border them, it's going to cost tons of influence to put claims on their territory, even with various things I have reducing that cost. Had to save up a bit to make it happen, but once I was ready, we get to this situation. One of their fleets was outside of their space, so I could happily just park next to them in this neutral zone, and be ready to ambush them as soon as a war starts with my overwhelming firepower right here. So we're ready. We'll pop off a bunch of the exotic matter buffs just to make sure we're extra powerful, mainly just because I need to waste those things on something since I'm not using them with the Birch world. And then that was the war. That was quick, wasn't it? We just completely annihilated them in like 2 seconds. I thought they might resist us more because they're an ancient empire who are on a higher tier of tech than we are, Even though they had a lower number, I thought maybe they'd be okay. Not really at all, we took them down, and speaking of tech, now our science ships can come in and get the final tech tier, the dark matter tiered tech. Thus our ships after this war will be more powerful, very handy. We quickly occupy all of their space, but because we're trying to conquer everything, we need to take their planets in order to force them to surrender. So I'm bringing in transport ships to gradually do that. It takes a while for them to show up because I forgot to get them ready, I suppose. In fact, it takes so long for them to show up that the officer leading one of the fleets dies of old age on the way. This isn't like my previous bird race that essentially lived forever. The squirrels have actually died. I didn't mention it, by the way, but in my previous Birch World campaign, at the end of the campaign I had the same faction leader as at the beginning. That's how long our lifespans were by the end of it. Anyway, you can see that they also sent a fleet to go and attack one of my vassals for no particular reason. I eventually caught up with them when they got distracted trying to bombard a planet, and again within seconds they lose a fight, even against a smaller portion of my navy. So that's fine. Now we just need to finish everything off back in their territory. Here's me bombarding them. They've got some massive garrisons on some of these planets, so difficult for us to take them. We could wait. You can see their garrison strength is reducing because we're continually bombarding the planets. However, I also had like a 4,000 or 5,000 strong army, which should be enough to overpower these guys, so I thought let's just throw them in. We've got plenty more things where this stuff came from. It's a selection of our Doom Squirrels, who are a powerful race, some cloned Gene Soldier Doom Squirrels, the Space Marine version of them essentially, and some Xenomorphs, just some creatures thrown in there to do whatever they want. Over time, we do defeat them, taking enormous casualties, but as mentioned, we can just recruit them again. Doesn't really matter, we don't need armies very much in this campaign. And there we go, we eventually force them to surrender. Thus, all of their territory goes to me, and we have successfully dealt with one of the ancient empires. Then we have to click a lot of times to gradually move all of their population into the Birch World. Then we have to click a bunch more times to get rid of their space stations and disband all of the territory, and eventually they are totally gone. And now we have more stuff in our museum. Another race is brought in to be protected in our sacred vaults. We can use this new population to expand the Birch World. Not that we need to at all. This will just increase our resource generation, but we already have an effectively infinite amount of resources. We can't spend them on anything, so it doesn't really matter at this stage. Very good. I could now go and do this to the other two ancient empires that are on the map. However, I couldn't be bothered, because after discovering how easy it was to do, I lost interest. I was like, oh, okay, I could absorb in the other ancient empires, but I guess I don't want to do the clicking required, so I just left them in the end. The good news, though, is that my vassals are now expanding out and filling in the galaxy. The big empty zone to the southwest now has a bit of territory from two different factions, and more will be on the way. So that's all good. They'll be generating some pop for us. However, this is all happening too late in the game. Really, with this campaign, all I've done is discover better ways to do the exact same campaign, where it's definitely not getting the maximum number of people you could get into the Birch World using this strategy. Not that it makes any material difference, because we're far beyond the amount we need to win the campaign. Here you can see I did integrate one of the factions, the brown faction that was in between these guys up in the top left. They had quite a lot of population, so the Birch World is now going to be expanded a lot more. The thing is, at this stage, integrating factions takes ages. Like these guys here, it's going to take 10 to 15 years to integrate the Hive Mind faction, and I thought I'd better get on with that and find out whether they're actually going to die or not. Let's actually see if my plan from earlier is going to work, which I already spoiled. It doesn't. But the lesson is, you probably need to start integrating at more like 2350 and be a feudal power the entire time, so that your vassals are actually expanding before that. So yes, we've really not got the most efficient possible museum run strategy here, but it's been good enough. Anyway, I'm just going to sit back again and wait for the next integration. I thought integration was instantaneous once it was done, but actually you can see It does take place over a period of time, but it's like the last 0.1% of the integration period is when the integration happens. Not sure why, that distinction is so pointless, it might as well just be instantaneous, easier to code. Anyway, we've now taken in the Hive faction, and the question is, are they all going to die? The answer is of course yes. It puts them in the undesirables category, which means you're automatically purging them, but they're just sort of implied to be dying in the background. And there's not much you can do about this. I had the same issue in my first Stellaris campaign. There is actually a way to get around it using different Ascension perks, but you can't change them once you've picked them, so basically they're going to be dying in the background. I'm still going to move them to the Birch World anyway, and for that I'm using this new mod I've just found. It's a thing that allows you to click a decision on a planet to move all of the population to a given location, because this empire had something like 1,500 pops in it. That means to resettle them, I would have to click at least 1,500 times, and that might take a while. So I decided we need to find a better way of doing this. And this mod here is kind of janky, but it works in the end. You can basically move the entire population of one planet to another planet. You eventually pick the Birch World once you get the list to work. It kind of freezes the game for a bit, and then the planet you're doing this on just gets decolonized and goes back to being an empty planet, and it's all done. So that's saving some time, definitely saving some clicks. Now I just have to do this for every planet instead of doing something for every single pop. By the time I'm done with that, the galaxy is looking more and more full, which in many ways is bad actually, because we don't have enough time to integrate them at this late stage in the campaign. But there we go, we've got over 3,000 population in the Birch World, and the undesirables will count towards our population until they die, so we can actually build loads of extra districts in the Birch World, which will then I guess just become empty later. But that's handy, they're about half our total population. Being undesirable is a job apparently in the jobs system. Not sure why they've bothered to integrate it like that, but they're working full time at being undesirable and just, well, being creatures that don't have an independent brain, so they're just sitting there doing nothing, and maybe they'll go away. Now here's me integrating the next faction that I decided to go after. It's the one in the top right. But then I stopped. The reason is quite simple. I couldn't be bothered to continue integrating them. I've got so many planets there on the right to still go through. I eventually thought, well, I don't need any more people. Nothing will change if I integrate them. I might just leave them out there and see if the crisis kills them all. So in many ways, I'm flunking my duties as a museum curator. I realise it's too much micro to actually integrate the entire galaxy, even with some micro-saving mods. I just need a big button that just says absorb everyone, because it is a process that could theoretically be automated. I just don't want to do it myself. There is actually an edict you can use with the Birch World that moves everybody who's unemployed into the Birch World, which is a start. You might be able to declare every species a slave or something to make them all be unemployed and then pull them in with that method. I think you have to have certain species traits, or certain faction traits I should say, in your civics that you pick at the very beginning, like you have to be xenophobic in order to make other species into your slaves. To use that potential workaround, so another thing to keep in mind for another attempt at this campaign, I suppose. But for now I just thought, I guess I've made my point. I'm not going to bring them all in. Let's just wait for the world to end. This time, we actually did get a crisis before the game ended, so that's working this time, very handy. It's the protectorate scourge, or whatever they're called. The guys who did show up in my last campaign, but they died instantly, and then that was the end of that. But this time, they are 10 times stronger, so their initial wave of ships is pretty good. It's as powerful as my fleets, their little vanguard fleets here, and they're certainly going to be more powerful than those of my vassals. So I thought, well, if I just put all of my fleets together, we could go around and overpower them. Therefore, to start with, I wanted to do the rules that I imposed on myself in the previous campaign, and that is, I'm not allowed to give orders, something like that. I'm not allowed to actively fight the crisis, because you probably would defeat it if you really tried early on. And it turns out that's a terrible idea, because with this Scourge faction, as someone actually did tell me in the comments on one of my videos, if you wait long enough, they come back with a second wave that's much stronger. So you can see here a death blob, a 3 million strong fleet is sailing out there, and there's more where that came from. So seeing that, I was like, even if I combined everything, we might not be able to defeat one of their fleets, and we're already at our naval capacity, so we can't cheaply make more ships. You can go over naval capacity, they just cost more and more to upkeep. Not that cost is necessarily an issue here. So you can see I am just going to spit out full fleets from my shipyards. I have an equatorial shipyard and one space station that is all shipyards, so I can make like 15-16 ships at a time. Handy enough. So while we're building them, all we can do is take a look at what's happening to our allies. The space stations that the Scourge makes are as powerful as one of my fleets, which is pretty impressive. Somebody in the comments on one of the videos was saying that you can defeat a 25 times crisis with vanilla fleets. Well, I essentially have vanilla fleets here against a 10 times crisis, so there's some way of bringing them down, but looking at the situation I didn't feel particularly confident about that. You can see a lot of movement here. What I'm doing is taking all of my ships that I got from integration and just combining them together into one big fleet. I could disband them and then build better ships back at home, but I wanted to try and make them into a fleet and then just upgrade the fleet. I'm not sure if that's faster or more resource efficient to do it that way, but that's what I did. So eventually we get 2 not very good fleets after combining everything, and we get them out of there. We are abandoning the battlefront, making sure our allies have absolutely no chance. Or do they? Because while I was just waiting for things to get worse, I noticed the Scourge had stopped doing anything. Their fleets are just sort of sitting around, even in systems where they haven't taken control of the system yet. They're just kind of there. And I figured maybe the game's just glitched out, they're not even doing anything. I remembered seeing this in my previous campaign, crisis factions that just would not try to attack you and would just sit there. So I figured, oh, that's the end of that. They've just given up. And I guess I have all the time in the world to get some more research or something and just kill them later. As it happens, after waiting though a really long time, they did come back to life and start conquering once again. Maybe it's a deliberate part of the AI, it gives you a break now and again to try and rebuild your fleets by not attacking you particularly forcefully, especially if it happened to spawn like in your territory, you'd be in trouble. I integrated the faction that they're ready to attack here, the Holy something or other, so I now get a whole bunch more ships and systems to use. This is interesting because it gives me control over shipyards on the front line, so I figured if we start combining our newly integrated fleets and upgrading them there and then, we might actually be able to start fighting the Scourge before they get to my inner museum zone. Because we now own a lot of the planets that are being attacked by the Scourge, we get these messages about low stability. The people are unruly, they don't like being absorbed into the Scourge. I'm guessing the Scourge is eating them or something. Not quite sure what. For now they're just bombarding us from orbit, which doesn't do all that much to the population. What we can do though is rescue planets that are under attack. I obviously could just pull all of these populations into the Birch world, but as already mentioned, I was beyond caring. But I thought since these people were complaining about dying, I'll try and pull them in. You have to keep using this decision until the random list has where you want them to go. Look for the Birch world, send them off, then the game lags for a bit while it thinks about how to do this, I suppose. And then it will come back, and the planet is empty. So there we go, we've saved a whole bunch of lives. How we did that logistically, I don't know. And you're technically not allowed to resettle a planet that's under attack. So this is essentially cheating, but we've done it now. And we've saved a bunch of lives in the process. Handy, but we're probably not going to do that to everyone. Well, I still might actually, I'll come back to that in a second. Here you can see the vassal fleets, the assembled fleets of the Holy Empire, or whoever they were, have now been upgraded using a few of their star bases after replacing all of the slots with shipyards. So we've now got this non-negligible force of our auxiliary units. I've thrown in a few of my own fleet admirals to power them up. And here we go, fighting one of the enemy's million-strong fleets. We don't have the raw fleet power to match, but the battle actually goes okay. I'm guessing because fleet power is kind of an abstraction. In this case, it might mean that they have really good attack but low defense, so we can kill them. We're just going to get killed quite fast. We have shields though, and they don't, so that might absorb some of the damage they're doing to us. Overall, who knows how the battle system specifically works. It's a big, colourful jumble of lines, and by the end of everything, we do defeat that Scourge fleet. We lost a whole bunch of stuff. We lost more than half of our fleets, I believe, so we're ruined. We can't do that again. I figured though that this was a big victory. We've taken out one of their Scourge blobs, and I thought if we play our cards right, we might be able to gradually take out more. As I learned after this though, they actually respawn, which I learned to much devastation on the Stellaris wiki. It reminded me of Total War Attila, where the Huns will respawn. Basically, you have to kill them all at the same time because every 2 years they just fully respawn, and you also have to reoccupy all of the territory they've taken and get rid of their infested planets to stop them from respawning. So that's a lot of work. We definitely can't do it with this now half-dead fleet. And, well, we might be able to do it with everything else if we put a lot of effort into it. Basically, I played a bit further than this and then rage quit after I realised how annoying it was going to be to deal with the fact that their fleets just respawn after you kill them. I had too many bad memories, probably of Total War Attila. Anyway, I've decided to go back on my rage quit and actually play this war in a more serious capacity and try to win. My vague plan is actually to just sacrifice the entire galaxy while I build up techs to make my fleet a little bit more powerful, so that we don't lose half of our fleet in each engagement, that sort of thing. We'll have to see, and I will have to see. The next episode might be very short if we instantly lose or I rage quit again, but maybe we can make something of this. We'll let the enemy take over as much territory as they want, possibly save some of the pops they're about to kill just before they die or something, depends how much I can be bothered to click on buttons. Maybe we'll be the good museum timeline, where the fact that we've collected life together into the Birch world actually does preserve life through a crisis event. Although of course we're making the crisis get worse before we act in order to increase our own political capital, like any wise museum curator. Anyway, join me next time for maybe something.